Cool. Welcome, everyone. Sorry for that abrupt transition. I DJ, but it's not my main job. So, welcome. And my name is Sean DeLuna. I'm going to introduce you to the key speakers here and our facilitator. But first, welcome to our final session of the Career Acceleration Series. If you're interested in any of the other ones that we've hosted, I'll be posting the link to all the recordings here at the end of the session. But I want to kick it off right now to our speakers and set some norms and expectations here in this panel discussion. As we engage in this discussion, feel free to submit questions in the chat. And some of these questions will be answered based on the flow of the discussion that is happening. But I want to remind everyone that Teach for America is a nonpartisan organization, as well as the White House Fellowship is also a nonpartisan fellowship. Therefore, we won't be addressing any questions that are related to party affiliation, and we're going to be talking strictly about how your TFA leadership experience and White House Fellowship experience align really nicely, and opportunities, what the experience is like, questions you might have, and how it might accelerate your career and develop you professionally. There's also going to be resources shared at the end of the call about other civic and public policy leadership opportunities. And with that, I'd like to introduce to you Rachel Evans, the Executive Vice President at Teach for America for Chief Revenue and Development Officer. And Rachel, welcome. Thanks for being here, and feel free to take it from here.
Awesome. It is so great to be with you all this evening. I was just telling our panelists before you all hopped on, I attended the National Civics Bee earlier today, which was really wonderful. And I'm already just in my head thinking, okay, we need all of the 8th graders that were in the Civics Bee to join Teach for America. Then we need everybody who does Teach for America to become a White House Fellow. And this is just our pipeline to public service. And so thank you all for being here today. I'll share a little bit about myself, then I'll pass it over to the panelists. I am 5 months back in my role at Teach for America. I started out as a Baltimore Corps member and a 15-year boomeranger back on staff. I also serve as an Army chaplain in the reserves, which is something that I actually did after my White House Fellows experience. So I can share a little bit more about that. And on that note, Lee, I will pass it over to you. I believe you are our first Teach for America alum to become a White House Fellow.
Well, thank you, Rachel. And in fact, I was, and I only just learned that because Ryan told me that about 2 weeks ago. So I didn't know that fun fact until I agreed to be on this panel, and then Ryan shared that with me. So I'm glad to know now that I was a pioneer that I didn't realize that I was. But super glad to be, yes, exactly, super glad to be talking with you all today. I was a White House Fellow 2000, 2001. I was a 93 Teach for America Corps member, so very like old school TFA. I was an English teacher in Los Angeles, having never previously been west of Chicago. So it was a new place for me and a place that really started my journey. After that, I became an attorney and I wore a bunch of different hats as an attorney. I was a congressional fellow. I worked for the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and Urban Affairs. And then I worked on staff at Georgetown Law School, which is where I got my law degree. And in the midst of all of that, co-founded a charter school, ran it briefly, and came on staff at Teach for America after all of that, and have worn many hats over many years, currently working on policy and government affairs. So with that, I will turn it over to Warren.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Warren Morgan. I was a 2007 St. Louis Corps member. I also was the executive director for Teach for America in St. Louis, actually after finishing up my White House Fellowship. I'm currently serving as the CEO of Cleveland Metropolitan School District. And I guess just brief trajectory. After graduating from college, I didn't join the Corps immediately. I actually worked for the Illinois Senate first, and then joined the Corps where I taught in St. Louis, was a principal and a high school principal in Chicago Public Schools. Got recruited through a Teach for America fellowship to go to Cleveland, where I was a systems leader. Got my first idea in systems leadership. Yeah, I see Believe land there. Yes. And then from there, after being a network superintendent, that's when I did the White House Fellowship, and I served during a transition year. And I'll talk more about that coming up. And then had other experiences that led me to being the CEO superintendent of Cleveland School District. So happy to be on the call this evening.
All right.
Taking over, Ryan.
Yeah. I'm not used to calling you Dr. Ryan. I will say the doctor is a new part of the title. Congratulations, newly minted Dr. Ryan Tauriainen. Take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone. Ryan here. I was a 2008 Hawaii Corps member. I think I saw another Hawaii part of my ohana in here. I was a 7th grade language arts teacher in Central Oahu, Wahiawa to be precise, and spent 3 years in the classroom before becoming a school leader, and spent good 5 years in school leadership, then systems level, district level leadership, all in the charter world, here in DC, actually, mostly. And after 3 years of being at the district level for charter schools here in DC, I became a White House Fellow in 2019. And after my White House, I was placed at the Department of Ed. And after my White House Fellowship year, I actually extended. I got sort of like a special appointment and continued on until 2021, in which I then was blessed enough to become the executive director here in DC and Virginia for Teach for America.
Awesome. So we have a couple of questions that we have teed up, and then we'll try to make time for questions in the chat at the end. But just to kind of ground us, by virtue of being on this call, we already have a lot of things in common. We're TFA alums. And so that commitment to service, a commitment to the public good, an interest in doing things that are challenging and proximate to the communities that we serve, that will grow our leadership. These are things we all have in common. What are some things that the White House Fellowship offered you in your own development or career trajectory that felt unique from a lot of the experiences that you had in TFA? And Warren, I will pick on you to go first on this one.
Yeah, so there are some similarities to these cohort models, and so the one thing I will share is the thing that is that feels similar to your TFA experiences, that in the White House Fellowship, you have a cohort, you have a network. And so like just in your core year, you have people that you come in, that you do the program with, and the fellowship component of that is actually having a fellowship class. There are 3 major components of the White House Fellowship. One is the education component of it. Those are the speakers that you're getting, some leadership development that you're doing throughout the fellowship. There is a second component that is your work placement. You're actually placed at a work site, which also, like with the 4 year, you're actually placed at a work site. I was also, like Ryan, placed at the Department of Education. And the third component of the White House Fellowship is your fellow fellows and what you learn from them in the network. Something that I think that in my experience, that is really unique is that the fellowship is really competitive. So everyone who is they get selected through the White House Fellowship, because it's a really long and competitive process. These are people that have been, mid to senior leaders in their career, and you take a year, a break from what you've been doing in your career to come to DC at the highest levels of government to work with the president's cabinet, and also agencies, to learn what you can about the highest levels of government, and then taking that back to your community. And I think that's really unique, but there's so many similarities to what we do as TFA alums in terms of what we're learning about the education system and how we apply that to our careers, that I see some things that are parallel, but then also some things that are really unique and different.
Yes, can I build on that, Warren? So one thing that I think was really interesting and unique about the White House Fellows Program is the diversity of sort of issue areas that your fellow classmates care about and have experience in. So Teach for America, I mean, one thing I love about Teach for America is that everyone shares a passion for educational equity, which is awesome because that's something I have a passion for. But it was also really wonderful to have a year of exposure to people who had passions in issue areas and experience and expertise in issue areas that were outside of the one that I had built expertise in. So and because I've been out of both, you know, like my TFA core experience was clearly a long time ago, but my White House fellowship experience was a long time ago as well. But I'm still in touch with these people who are now, you know, leaders in the healthcare sector, leaders in the military, leaders in all sorts of spaces that I would otherwise really not have access to just for my own personal learning, professional growth, having the exposure of really being deeply connected to people who are across all of these issue areas. To me, that was something that was pretty unique about the White House Fellows Program and distinct from Teach for America.
I think I agree with everything that was said, and I'll go beyond the the members of your class that you serve with, which is anywhere between 11 and 19 folks maximum. But then there's also this just absolutely outstanding alumni network, and alums of the White House Fellowship tend to be very engaged with one another. We have conferences and trips and whatnot throughout the year, and a number of traditions that where these conferences happen around the same time every year. And it's amazing how generous people are with their time to their fellow fellows. I still it's still striking to me that I have, because this particular fellow is so generous with his time, I could, if I wanted right now, I could call our Secretary of the Navy. He is a White House Fellow alum, and he is so generous with his time to fellow fellows that he literally will give you his personal cell phone and email to call him for anything or help with anything. So that is, Carlos Del Toro. So Secretary Del Toro, that type of generosity from people who are serving at the highest levels of business, government, you name it, it's not typical. It's extraordinary. And it's something that's only been offered to my life because I was in the fellowship.
One thing I would add before we go to our next question is I think, your Teach for America cohorts are diverse in the sense that we recruit from all over the country, we place all over the country, but the selection model is really about, are you going to be an effective teacher for kids? And are you going to be an effective member of our community? The White House Fellows selection process is really intentionally about building a cohort that is diverse in every sense of the word, professionally, ideologically. And one of the stated outcomes of the program is actually to build really deep relationships with people for the purpose of being able to engage in a lot of really thoughtful discussions around issues that cover the gamut. And so I think one thing that I have really appreciated years out of my fellowship year is the ability, regardless of what is happening in the country, regardless of what political issue is top of mind, I have networks of people who share my values in the sense that they care deeply about the public good. They are service oriented, they are curious, they are humble, and they probably disagree on whatever issue is being discussed. And that we have really normalized, I think, what it is to be very open in those disagreements in kind of a safe and supportive space. And so I will say, I feel like my White House Fellows alumni and my affiliation with this network, I think, has made me a better, I would say, citizen. Whereas I think that Teach for America shaped me into a public servant in a lot of ways, but I would say the White House Fellows program, I would say in many ways shaped me into a better citizen than I think I would have been. All right, kind of a good segue into our next question here. So we just had a presidential election. We are living in very politically polarized country where it feels like, the day after the election, half the country was jubilant, half the country was devastated. The White House Fellows program is nonpartisan, but you work in explicitly partisan context. You work for a president, you work for political appointees. So how does that work, both within your cohort and as well as your placement site?
I'll start there just because when I served in a transition year. So I was appointed as a White House Fellow in the Obama administration, and stayed on 8 months into the in the Trump administration, because your fellowship year is a fellowship year. It's nonpartisan. I actually just facilitated 2 webinars for the current class, because they are actually going to, they were appointed in the Biden administration, and they're going to be transitioning into the Trump administration. And so and just like I told them, the White House Fellowship Program is nonpartisan. The creator of the fellowship, the co-creator, was also created with President Lyndon B. Johnson, but the co-creator of the fellowship, John Gardner, had this vision of really taking the best talent of rising leaders, people that are mid-career, senior in their career, having results, and bringing them to Washington, D.C. At the highest form of government for a year of learning. And that's what the fellowship is. It's a year of learning. And even though there's great opportunities with it, you get a chance to meet, these leaders, the president, and you get a chance to do these trips. The purpose of the fellowship program is to learn about all the things you're seeing, observing, different things that are taking place at the highest levels of government, and bringing that back so that when you go back into your community, or even if you stay in public service in DC, you're taking those learnings to make yourself a better leader, as I think Rachel put it really perfectly, by saying a better citizen. And that's what the fellowship program is about. So it's not really about partisan politics. It's not really about going in with your partisan agenda. It's really about learning. And what a great opportunity it is to take a step back for a year, to really get some intense development, some really great networking, to make lifelong connections that will really help you and advance your work as a public servant in the long term. And that's what the fellowship is. And so I would just say keeping that in mind and staying focused on that can really help you stay focused amid some of the things that are going on in partisan politics around you.
So something that's unique about the process for applying for the White House Fellowship is for the 30 people who become national finalists, it can start with thousands and it gets whittled down to 30 for the national finals. They are interviewed by a commission, all of whom are presidentially appointed to that commission on White House fellowships. So interestingly enough, in every administration, there have been commissioners from both parties during the same year. The commission, I have met commissioners from Democratic commissions, from Republican commissions, and something that I see that is consistent is that they are trying to be nonpartisan. Some do a better job than others, but they're trying to be nonpartisan, trying to create that diverse class. And I can say I was a White House fellow from 2019 to 2020. So the entire time of my fellowship year, I was there during the Trump administration. However, if you were to meet my class, you would realize there was everything from a self-described bleeding heart liberal to who's like far left to someone who was MAGA all the way. And so you had that, and then a lot of people in the middle. And so you had a wide breadth of experiences and views, but nevertheless, at least for my class, we felt very much like a cohesive family. And I'm friends with each and every one of them. And so I think that is actually something that is particularly beautiful about it. And then as far as working you're nonpartisanly appointed, but you will ultimately work in a partisan administration, right? Because they all are. And interestingly, I found that whether, to speak for people, my experience and folks in my class that I think would feel comfortable me talking about their experience, whether they were registered Republicans, independent, or Democrats, they were always able to work on a project that was close to their values, no matter what, and they felt like they were doing something good. And I could say the same for me at the Department of Ed. I didn't necessarily agree with every single policy that was going to come down the pike, but there was a lot that I did. And those are the things that I got to show leadership in.
Yeah, it's interesting. Warren and I had sort of a similar-ish context. Mine was obviously a long time ago, before things got quite as fractured, I would say, as they are now. I think that's fair to say. But I was also in a transition I was appointed under the Clinton administration, served the beginning part of my fellowship under that administration, and then shifted over to the Bush administration. And one group of fellows that I really took a lot of, I'd say I learned a lot from, were my military fellows. My class was 50% military. At the time, we knew that there would be a transition in government when we went in. We just didn't know to what. Would we be transitioning to, another Democrat, or would it be a Republican transition? And the commissioners were deeply mindful of that and actually felt that having a slightly bigger military presence in our class would be advantageous, because leaders in the military are very familiar with working in a nonpartisan context, the US military, for whoever the administration is. They report to the commander-in-chief, whoever that is. And so for me as a civilian, learning from them, how they navigate because you're coming with opinions. They may not wear it on their shoulder like they wear all the stuff, the stripes and things, but they have opinions, but they know how to navigate in that setting. And I feel like one great gift that I received was from my classmates, who I could see the different ways that they were navigating. But they'd already had such skill in that because their professional careers had always been in a setting where they needed to do that in a way. And so I learned a lot from the others in my class on how to be better at that than I think I might have otherwise been.
Yeah, I'll share sort of a practical note, and then I'll share a personal reflection. The practical note I would say is that the program is nonpartisan, but I would say partisanship varies based on your placement. So I think one rule of thumb is if a president campaigned on something, that is going to be a very political issue in a very political department. So if that was something that was front of mind of the campaign, and that is why that person got elected, then you can presume that they are going to be very focused on what happens in that department. They're going to have a really strong agenda. So, if a president runs on an education bill, then education is going to be more political than the Department of Commerce. And so when I did my interview process, I felt like I needed to be honest about where my values were, what I was interested in. And there were a few interviews where I think we walked away just mutually knowing, the principal and I am not a good fit for this. We are not aligned. I am not. And I would say, as a general rule, typically fellows classes are sort of split. About half of the placements are within agencies. So you might be at the Department of Treasury or the Department of, the Department of Homeland Security. And about half of the placements are more specifically in the White House. So you might work in the office of the staff secretary. You might work at the office of the first lady or first gentleman. I would say, generally speaking, White House positions, I think, usually skew a little bit more political because you are actually working a little bit more directly with the president and their immediate circle. The other thing I would offer to kind of echo some of the things that you were saying, Lee, is that I did get placed at the Department of Defense. And one thing that I really appreciated in that is that, at least among our military leadership, if you have stars on your shoulder, if you have been in the military for a while, you have naturally served as a leader under multiple administrations. And so I really appreciated what I saw as the true consistency across administrations among our leadership in that regard. Also, your highest kind of political appointees do circle out with administrations, but a lot of your most senior folks within a department are civil servants. And so they are there regardless of which political they're appointed to. And so for me, actually, one of the reasons that I really felt compelled to join the military after my White House Fellows service commitment was I was really inspired by, I think, that service and that consistency. And in particular, I think I saw the ways that I think we don't always serve our service members back. And so that was something that made me want to pursue chaplaincy. But I will say that was something really powerful to me about, I think, the integrity of the process that I experienced in a political environment. All right, I think we have, oh, go ahead.
I'll give voice to the question in the chat, because Brian, you brought up a great point about you got to work on a project that aligned with your values. And I just want to dig more into the experience and what you did. And then Rachel, you mentioned placements, and it's like, do you have a choice in some of those placements, or what degree do you know? And so if you can talk more about those two questions and take it wherever you want to. And I think it leads well into the next question too.
Sure, I'll talk really briefly. I mean, you might be able to tell by the years that I served, I was the COVID class. And so one of the things that while I was at the Department of Education that I suddenly got thrust into being a very large part of was all of the CARES Act emergency funding that was getting disseminated to schools. And so if you've heard the word ESSER, the acronym ESSER, I built the websites, I wrote the collateral, like there was stuff that I got to build and disseminate that literally went to every public and private school in the United States. And so getting to work on projects like that and to be a representative for the department, because at the time I was the only person sort of in the inner circle who had recent public school experience is what I will say. And so my voice became very needed and necessary. So you might see me on emails that included Dr. Fauci, for instance, back then. But that was obviously work that was important, and we were tireless in that first 30 days of trying to disseminate, I think it was like $36 billion within 30 days. So yes, that was a project that meant a lot to me and I think the country. And Rachel, take it away.
I'll say briefly how the process works as well. So it's like a medical matching process. So what happens is that your resume is distributed to principals within different agencies who say, yes, I would like to host a White House Fellow. They choose resumes that they think might be a good fit for projects that are open. And then you get interviews based on that. So some people might get 5 interviews, some people might get 11. It's not a commentary on how great you are. It really just has to do with the alignment within your background in the department. So I would say, like in my experience, the doctors in our cohorts always get a lot of interviews because pretty much every department has some sort of intersection with healthcare. So there's a lot of things like that. After you do your interviews, you rank them in order. You rank the order of where you would like to be placed. And they similarly rank the fellows in preference. And so not everybody gets their first match, but there is typically some alignment there. And I'll briefly say a project or initiative that I engaged in. I ended up extending my fellowship like Ryan did as well. And so I worked as the chief of staff to the Undersecretary for Personnel and Readiness. And so I ended up being involved in a lot of the, frankly, just the really troubling personnel related issues that would bubble up within the Department of Defense, things like suicidality, drug addiction, sexual assault. And so really, I think better understanding a lot of the systems and processes that are in place to really support service members that are struggling, it was really powerful.
One thing I'll add to this, just because I reflect on it and I think it's kind of funny. So because I was at the Department of Education, and sometimes when an administration is sort of on its way out because they have lost an election, they try to move quickly to do a lot of things so that it will take longer for the subsequent administration to like undo the things. So I was involved in doing the things that I then had to undo some of them directly. Like I knew it was happening as I was doing it. I thought, oh, great. So I'm going to draft this whole guidance document that is going to be pushed out. And then I'm going to subsequently be responsible for like essentially tearing it up. And that did happen, but it was sort of, for me, from a learning perspective, a really interesting exercise in how this works, right? Like, how does this thing work? And it means that this thing called like the government, the apparatus of government, and it means that now in the role I'm in now at Teach for America, having those understandings is actually very helpful because I'm watching the same thing happen right now. Like if you open the newspaper, you'll see like that's what's happening right now. And having been on the inside of that and seeing how that worked was itself just a really great education, even though it was kind of both amusing and somewhat frustrating to be spending a lot of time drafting a thing that you knew you were then going to have to just undo it. But still a good education and interesting to see how it worked.
Warren, anything you would add on a project or initiative that you worked on that was meaningful?
Yeah, a couple of things I'll add. One thing I was thinking about when Rachel was sharing about the matching. That is after once you're selected. So once you're selected as a fellow, the matching takes place in terms of finding your work placement. So I wanted to share that just in case people were understanding when that happens in the process. But a couple of things I worked on. So I worked at the Department of Ed, and uh, like Lee just shared, at the end of the administration, there was a lot of opportunities I was able to take advantage of because there was a lot of people leaving. Like when Hillary Clinton did not win the 2016 election, people started leaving. A lot of people expected to stay on, and so there were things. There were some buckets of work that the chief of staff in the Department of Ed or the deputy chief of staff were working on that they pulled me in pretty closely to work on. I got a chance to travel with the secretary of staff, some of his meeting Secretary King before the administration transitioned over. And so I took advantage of those things in a really short period of time to get as much access as possible. But there were some really great projects that I was working on, such as My Brother's Keeper, which was really a cross-functional effort in the Obama administration, where I worked really closely with my colleague that was placed out of the Domestic Policy Council, and also some other agencies that were doing that work. Promise Zones was another area that I was able to work on, and also doing some place-based initiatives, grants like the Native Youth Community Project grant. So a lot of things that were happening place-based wise. And because in the first Trump administration, it took a while before staff came on and really getting a lot of footing, those were some things I was able to really continue working on while I was also building relationships with the new people that were coming in. And the good thing really about this bipartisanship, actually, the transition landing team that came to the Department of Ed for Trump's team, there was a TFA alum on that. He's somebody I work with really closely with to this day. And that just shows you the power of the network of TFA, because TFA within itself is a network, and the alumni network. You can really take advantage of that because there's TFA people everywhere. And so there were, when the Trump team came in and I saw that there was a TFA alum there, I made a point to make a connection there and was able to get plugged into some things that Secretary DeVos was really working on. But those were some of the projects that I worked on, and also it talks a little bit about how you can leverage relationships in a transition, or even if it's a different party that is coming in.
James, I see your question in the chat as well, and then we'll go to the third one here. But understanding that the program is extremely demanding, how would you frame the experience to a partner who's concerned with work-life balance?
I feel like this is such a, it's amusing that I would even attempt to answer this question, only because I don't think I would ever, I think my husband now, keep in mind, I've been married to him for like 25 years, so it clearly worked out. I don't think he would say that work-life balance has ever been like my number one greatest strength. So I have a few thoughts on this. I mean, one is that oftentimes what is preceding a White House fellowship, like in order for most people to become a White House fellow, they've usually been working pretty hard before that. It's not a place you end up it's not something you end up doing without having had a pretty serious work commitments prior to the White House fellowship. So I guess I would start by saying that. The second thing I would say is I was very strategic actually in where I wanted in terms of that ranking and matching and all of that, because I did actually have something else I wanted to be doing at the same time as I had, as I was a White House fellow. And unfortunately, it was, I would say it further was more of a like work, like, because it was an additional work related type of thing. It wasn't like I wanted to like go be spending more time doing some more balanced activity. But I mentioned in my introduction that I was also had been a co-founder of a charter school, and the charter school was just getting off the ground as I got a White House fellowship. And so I made sure I cleared all appropriate conflicts of interests and all of that. But I knew that that was a project and something I wanted to continue working on during my fellowship year to ensure that that school could really continue to, it was the first year of the school, and I wasn't about to let that go. And so I was strategic I chose to work in an agency. I chose not to work in the White House itself. I felt like I could put slightly better parameters on my sort of like in this case it was work balance, but the point is it gave me a little more space to be doing something else. So I think there are ways to, even within the White House Fellowship Program, make some choices depending on what your other commitments are. I mean, some people, might have family caregiving responsibilities and choose to make choices related to which placements they more want to be in versus others. It will never be like it won't be a light year, but there's ways to make it heavier or lighter, depending.
Right. I want to see people voting up.
I totally agree with what Lee just shared. I also would share, like when I did the White House Fellowship, I had been a high school principal. I was a regional superintendent for the district. The White House Fellowship year was actually pretty light compared to my previous role, and then you get thrown back into it. And that, the other thing I would share just as people that are considering it, the White House Fellowship is what you make it. So people's experiences range. I think a lot of times people go into it thinking that the work placement is going to be the best part of it, and you're going to be sitting side by side with the president and like in all these meetings, rushing in and out and jumping on planes. Sometimes that is the case, and sometimes it's not. And that's okay. But the big part of the fellowship is really what you learn from it, what you get from the other people that are in your cohort, and the network. And that network stays with you forever. And so I think it ranges, but I do agree with Lee. And I know we have so many varying core years on here. The fellowship itself, people who get selected, it's really competitive. So it's people that have done some work, had results, and so it's. I'm not going to say it's going to be perfect in terms of the work-life balance, but it's probably something that people who have done this have confronted that question for themselves and figured out how that works for them. It is sacrifice for it. I'm not married or do not have a family, and didn't have a family when I did the fellowship. But there are people who are married and have families, and their family picks up and moves to DC for a year just to move back. There's some families that decide, hey, my spouse and kids will stay in the place where we are, and I will pick up and move to DC. And that's a choice, and it's a sacrifice with that. And those are all things that come along with the fellowship as well.
Yeah, I'll say briefly on that, just to name it. Like, I think this is a really interesting, like, gendered component of the fellowship. So if you look historically in the data, all the years we've been fellows, like I think we've had 2 or 3 classes that have had more women than men in the cohort. And disproportionately, I think women who are White House fellows are not parents during their year compared to men. It is much more common, I think, to have men be parents. And I think that has to do a lot with kind of like a bit of sometimes a family dynamic where if there are children involved, a lot of times like there is a male fellow who is married to a woman who is taking on more of those responsibilities. I think that's a very common dynamic that I think plays out in the fellowship. That was at least true in my class and in the classes that have been around mine. That being said, one of the former directors of the program literally had like a newborn, I think, when she was a fellow, and made it work. And it's hard. And as the mother of a newborn now, that sounds exhausting, but like, I think you can do it at any point in time. But I do think it's hard to balance those commitments, whether you decide, if you have family commitments, to spend a year apart or to find out what that's going to look like. To Leah's point of the choice that you can make, just to give an example in my own experience, I would say there's kind of 2, I would say, broad archetypes of jobs that people have when you are fellows. So I'd say the first archetype is something in like the special assistant category, which often means like really cool fly on the wall. Like, and it's, you do more than that, but you are often just like with your principal. You are serving as an advisor. You are getting to be in the room where it happens. That's really great. But you are often in more of an advisory position. So your hours are long, but sometimes you don't necessarily own as director of a portfolio. And then there are people that really have jobs that they are tasked with. I split my year. So the first half of my year, I was a special assistant and just got to be in the room with the secretary and the joint chiefs of staff and hear things happen. But I largely was not called into emergency meetings. The second half of my fellowship year, when I was a chief of staff, I learned that the metro that goes to the Pentagon opens at 5 a.m. And I learned because I tried to get there before 5 a.m. And I learned that it closes at 10 p.m. And I learned because there were days when I left after 10 p.m. And so my days got a lot longer. And so I would say that's a real consideration when you're thinking about both your job placement and your family needs. Ryan, anything you would add on this question before we go to the third part?
No, I don't think so.
All right, final of our three sort of pre-teed up question. What is one thing you wish you knew going into the application process or your fellowship year that you know now and would like to share with our fellow alums on this call?
Well, so here's something I will mention, especially if there's anyone on the call who has already applied in the past. I applied 3 times before I made it into the fellowship. And my first time applying, I went in completely unaware of what the regional finals was going to look like. And the thing that I wish that I knew or wish I had done was be a little bit more prepared to talk about world affairs. So I kind of came in with a lot of expertise in education, obviously. I could talk about that ad nauseum, but I remember them asking me questions about foreign policy in South Asia, and I was stumped. I didn't know what to say to that. And I think part of it is to see if you know, and the other part of it is to see how you respond to pressure. And I didn't respond well to pressure, and I did not make it that particular year. And so something I wish I had known is to just be a little bit prepared to answer foreign policy questions. And in addition, just be ready for someone to throw a curveball at you and to not sweat it. I now do the regional final interviews as a panelist, as an alumni panelist. And I get a lot of joy in asking those curveball questions that I suffered from when I applied 3 different times.
I think one thing that I didn't expect or really think about ahead of time was just the enduringness of the relationships that I would form with the other people who were in my class. Like I went into the White House Fellowship not knowing a ton about what it was going to be and not really having a lot of expectations. But I know one thing I didn't expect was that I would wind up with some members of my class who are like genuinely lifelong friends. Like this week, partially because there was Veterans Day and a number of the members of my class and my friends are veterans or serving in the military. Like we have group chats still like on my phone that were active this week, and I actually, just like 2 weeks ago went and saw someone from my class. So I think when I think of like the people in my life who I can say have been my friends for 20 years, 25 years, I guess, I didn't expect that I would have an experience where I would have a handful of people, not everyone in my class. I'm not in touch with everyone in that way, but there are a good number of people from my class who I literally consider lifelong friends. Like I show up, right? Like I show up at their promotions or retirements or weddings or funerals or whatever. And that stuff really matters. So I think I didn't expect that. And that was something I didn't know about the program, but definitely was part of my experience.
My response to this is not necessarily something I wish I would have known that I know now. But I guess something that I did, and I would encourage people to do, since like I said, we have varying ranges of classes on our core member years on this call. When I first found out about the fellowship, I was a second year core member, and I remember it coming. Back then, we had like this like intranet for TFA. I think it was like called TFA Net, and it came across there as a fellowship. And I said, "Oh, this seemed pretty cool." Before my core year, I worked in state government. I said, "Oh, this may be something I want to do after the core." And a White House fellow had recently just got appointed, or that I read about, Chris Meyer, and I was like, "Okay, yeah, this may look like something I want to do." And I went on the website and I read the bios of just the class, and I realized, nope, it wasn't the time. And there were many times I kept, and I never applied in those other times, but there were many times I would go back and just say, "Is this the year?" And I may jump on a call like this, and I would realize, nope, it's not the time. And so, because the application is it takes a while. The process is long. And it is competitive, as you just heard from Ryan. It is common sometimes that people apply multiple times and don't get in. You want to make sure you've done your due diligence and you're ready by the time you apply. And so by the time I did apply, I felt ready. I did get in that time, but it was a really long competitive process. And the thing I tell people, it was a type of process that throughout the process, I never felt like, "Oh, I got this." Like, you go into a regional room, like everybody there was really impressive. When I got to nationals, I remember having to go into the bathroom several times and just take a deep breath, looking in the mirror and just saying like, "Hey, you got this," because it was just that competitive. And so this is not a thing that you just apply for and say, "Let me just see if I get in." Do your research, talk to fellows, talk to people that can review your application if you're actively going through it, because it is definitely a commitment, and you want to make sure you're competitive when you go through it.
I know we're about to pass things over. I would say my 2 cents on this, to kind of echo what you were saying, Warren. I will also say, like, I became a fellow because I saw Warren on a webinar like this, and it was really helpful. I didn't know him before, and now we've been on the White House Fellows Board together, so it's a small world. But I would say, for me, reading the bios just freaked me out. I remember when I went to nationals. And I will just say, my own background, like, I was a first generation college student. I went to a state school. Like, Teach for America was like the thing that I had done. I had generally just been successful in the educational things that I had done, but I did not feel like I had like all of these feathers in my cap in terms of affiliations. And I remember the first person I met at nationals was a Navy SEAL with an MBA from Harvard and a JD from Yale and his undergraduate from Princeton. And I was just like, well, it's so nice to be here. It's so nice. I'm just going to see myself out. And so I would say, don't be psyched out by that. Like, don't be psyched out by that stuff. The best advice I got on the prep side was, the White House Fellows is selecting for whole people. They're not just trying to select people that have done all of the most impressive things. Somebody told me once, we're looking for people that could hold their own if they were in the elevator with the president for 45 seconds, but we're also picking people that we want to be part of our alumni network. So if we had to sit next to them for a transatlantic flight for 4 hours, we would enjoy that the whole time. And so somebody gave me the advice that you should think of, what are the 10, 2-minute anecdotes, stories about my life, personal, professional, whatever, that if a person only knew these 10 stories, they would have a pretty good sense of who I was as a person. And to actually write those down and find ways to weave that content into your written application, into any questions, so that you're actually walking away like feeling like you've put the totality of who you are out there. And I thought that was really, really good advice. All right. On that note, Sean, I think we pass it back to you.
Thank you, Rachel. I hope that answers one of the questions in the chat about what made you stand out. Just, Warren, thank you about talking about do your own research and then tapping into the network. So what I'm sharing here is just a slide of everyone who's a Teach for America alum and also White House Fellow. And this deck will be shared with you post-call. There'll be email sent out next week for a post-event recording. I know there's many people who wanted the content and couldn't make it today. But feel free to reach out to these folks. The reason why we are not sharing their email address or contact details is partly because of data privacy, but their names this is public record here. So you are able to look them up on LinkedIn and do your research. And I really appreciate Warren, Rachel, you talking about feather in your cap, right? Getting your experience in. And so there's lots of opportunities offered, not just by TFA. We've got Molly here from Lee to talk about some of the stuff, but from TFA stuff, we've got partnerships with other organizations. This is from the Office of Equity and Belonging, where also these resources will be shared with you, where you can explore other ways to grow your leadership, civic leadership, and put more feathers in your cap so you can figure out if you're ready or when you're ready to apply. And with that, I also want to share more about Lee, which Molly, I'd like to invite you to talk more about opportunities here.
Yes, thank you. It's so great to be here, and I myself am inspired. I feel like I've passed the season where the White House Fellowship is part of my trajectory, but I'm just so thankful to get the opportunity to learn about it and hear about these amazing public servants. So I am the senior director on Lee's policy and advocacy team. I lead our member impact and effectiveness work, and hoping that you too are feeling inspired to pursue having an impact through this session, perhaps through the White House Fellowship or perhaps through another avenue. And my team would just love to support you if this is in your trajectory this year or in the years to come. So I will drop some of the links from this slide into our chat. But as a TFA alum, you are eligible for Lee membership, and our team can help you prepare your application and get ready to be a really strong candidate. If now is not quite the time, while I'm here, I wanted to make you aware of a few other opportunities. We have a set of online courses to help you upskill. We also have a couple of fellowships that are opening in December and January ourselves. So think about the long path to leadership and impact. And I think on the next slide, we have a QR code for those of you who are not yet registered for Lee membership. So please do so. We are here to support your impact. And again, just thanks for having me. I'll pass it back to Sean to close us out. Oh, Sean, you're on mute.
Oh, thank you, Molly. Like I said, there's going to be a follow-up email with all these resources, but I want to make sure we maximize the time here. And instead of going through talking about a survey that you'll fill out at the end of the call, I want to go back to right now. Any last questions folks might have regarding the fellowship? I saw a couple in the chat, and feel free to come off mute, put them in the chat. We just have a couple more minutes left, about 6 minutes to wrap up. What do you think made you stand out from thousands of other applicants? Okay.
I would say, oh, and it's good that Molly is here because Lee was really helpful to me in, when I was actually going through the application process, working directly with someone from Lee and having them read the application, really make it better. Because the application, there's several different essays and there's a word limit, and we call it the paper cut, but I think I don't know if all of us on this call, but definitely I think Rachel and Ryan, you guys have done the paper applications. I know I've done the paper applications, and you're reading a lot of them. And as someone who's reviewed it, everyone's impressive. Everyone's kind of had the same background, and you want something that really stands out. And so, one, you want to be true to yourself, but you also want to offer something, especially when it comes to like the policy memo and why you want to do the fellowship, something that stands out, that's unique to you, but then also something that contributes and shows how you differentiate. And I'll just leave it there. There's many people that can be a support to you, for our former fellows or Lee that can help you think about that if you're in that process. But that's where it starts. Because if you don't make it the paper cut, you won't even get a chance to do the interview process where you can talk a little bit more about yourself.
I'll just say, don't underestimate random things. Like I hitchhiked across the country in my 20s. I think I mentioned that offhandedly in one of my essays. It was like a filler fact to me trying to make a broad point. And I got asked about hitchhiking across the country in all of my interviews. And so I would say, in addition to kind of like your professional accomplishments, do you play the French horn? Do you I don't know, do you have like a random hobby? Like, do you have a funny childhood nickname? Like, is there something that is memorable and interesting about you that doesn't necessarily make you feel super credible, but it helps fill you out as a person and maybe make you a little memorable in that way? I think those details matter too.
The only thing I'll add, I'm not going to necessarily speak about me personally, but there are something that's great about the White House Fellowship process. They're very clear about the selection criteria. And it's really just down to 4 things that they said that they're looking for. And those 4 things are: 1, a record of remarkable professional achievement early in one's career; 2, evidence of leadership skills and the potential for further growth; 3, a demonstrated commitment to public service; and 4, the skills to succeed at the highest levels of government and ability to work effectively as part of a team. So I think at its core, those are the 4 things that you want to make sure that you're demonstrating both on the paper application through your resume and the answers to the essays, but then of course, should you make it throughout the process when you're selling yourself in the in-person interviews.
Yeah, I saw one question that came through. If we're not ready, how do you build your resume? I mean, there's so many. Yeah, yeah. Oh, and then she is a Lee member. Okay, so that's awesome. Yeah, I was going to say there's so many different things, and TFA is such a great resource for finding different types of things, different types of fellowships. I think someone said this earlier on the call. Lee said this too, that the fellowship has so many different types of backgrounds, and so there's many ways you can make your impact, many ways that you can make your mark. So there's not one way, but I think really being connected to your why, like what do you want to do in this world, what is the change you want to see, like that's going to chart your trajectory, and whether this fellowship fits into that or not. But I think I'll be focusing on the change you want to see, and you'll begin to develop that resume through many different avenues and work experiences.
That's great. I love the commentary in the chat, people following up on people's questions. We have time for one more. I'd love someone to just close out with final thoughts on the fellowship. Any takeaways, anything you'd like to share to all our participants present here, as well as people who will be viewing this post event.
I would just say don't intimidate yourself. It is amazing an experience, and you learn a lot about yourself going through the process. And I would also say it has been Teach for America and the White House Fellows program have been the 2 most formative experiences of my professional career. And so if you're on the fence, you should absolutely do it. It's amazing.
Thanks so much, Rachel. And with that, I want to thank everyone for attending this call. And I recognize some other people's names here who have attended multiple calls in this series. So thank you for taking this time. Thank you, and wish you good luck in your application. And please feel free to reach out to any of the names that we'll be posting in the post-event resources. And good luck. Thank you all, and have a great night.